Morning, my son's girlfriend told me my car smelled like a nursing home. I was still holding my Uber keys. I had just pulled into the driveway after 4 hours of morning shifts. 6 rides. One of them was a young woman rushing to a hospital with flowers for her mother. Another was an elderly man who needed help with his seatbelt and thanked me 3 times. The last one was a college kid who fell asleep before we reached his apartment and left a half-eaten granola bar on my back seat. I was 69 years old, up since 4:45 in the morning, driving strangers across Charlotte while my son and his girlfriend slept in my house. Her name was Amber. She had moved in 6 months ago, which is to say my son Colin asked me one evening if she could crash here for a little while, and I said yes, the way you say yes when you love your kid and believe in second chances and haven't yet learned that some open doors never close on their own. She was standing on the porch when I pulled in, barefoot, wearing a silk slip dress at 9 in the morning, holding a mug with both hands like a photograph of someone pretending to be cozy. She looked at my car the way you look at something you're embarrassed to be associated with. "Oh," she said, nose wrinkling. "You're back." I turned off the engine. My hands ached the way they do after long mornings. Nothing severe, just the slow stiffness that comes from gripping a steering wheel for 4 hours when you're nearly 70. "Morning," I said. She stepped aside to let me pass, then followed me into the kitchen. "Your car," she said, setting her mug on the counter. "It has this smell. Like, I don't know. Old upholstery and whatever food people leave behind." She scrunched her nose again. "Colin's friend asked about it yesterday. It was kind of awkward." I set my purse on the entry table. My house, my purse, my entry table, 31 years of mortgage payments, ending the same year my husband George passed. Every surface in this kitchen, every cabinet handle, every worn tile near the dishwasher was paid for by decades of working, saving, doing without. "People eat in cars," I said. Amber shrugged. "I know, but it's like a strong smell. You might want to get it detailed or something." From upstairs, I heard Colin moving around, the slow, unhurried shuffle of someone with nowhere to be. It was 9:15 on a Tuesday. He appeared at the top of the stairs a few minutes later in basketball shorts and a wrinkled t-shirt. He was 34. His hair needed cutting. He smiled at me the way people smile when they're slightly guilty about something, but not guilty enough to change. "Hey, Mom. Good morning." "You work already," Amber answered for me. "Since, like, 5. Colin nodded vaguely, the way you nod when information doesn't quite land anywhere meaningful. He walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stood there staring at the inside like it might reorganize itself into something more interesting. "We're out of that creamer," he said. "I know. The hazelnut one." "I know, Colin." He closed the refrigerator and looked at me. "You going out later?" That question. So simple. So loaded. Going out meant, will you pick some up? It meant, while you're already driving around anyway. It meant, we've arranged our lives around the assumption that you will handle it. "I might," I said. Amber drifted toward the living room and settled onto the couch with her phone. She pulled a throw blanket over her legs. My blanket. The pale blue one. My sister quilted for me after George died. Colin poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. "You know," he said carefully, "Amber mentioned the car thing. You might want to look into one of those detailing places on Central. They're not too expensive." "Not too expensive," said by a man who had contributed nothing to the electric bill in 6 months. I looked at the sink. There were dishes in it from the night before, a pan with dried eggs still stuck to the bottom, 2 glasses, a cutting board with onion skins still clinging to the edges. I'd gone to bed before them and woken up before them, and somewhere in between, no one had found the 30 seconds it takes to rinse a knife. "I'll think about it," I said. I picked up the pan and turned on the hot water. Behind me, I could hear Amber laughing quietly at something on her phone. Colin's footsteps moved back toward the stairs. In a moment, I heard the television turn on upstairs. I stood at that sink scrubbing dried egg off a pan I had owned since 1998, and something settled into place inside me. Not anger. Not exactly. Something quieter. A slow and certain clarity. The kind that comes when you've been looking at something for so long you finally see it for what it actually is. I had told myself Colin was going through a rough patch. The job market was hard. His last relationship had been difficult. He needed time to reset. I had told myself Amber just needed stability, a safe place, a chance. I'd said yes, stay as long as you need, because that's what you say when you love your child, and you remember what it felt like to be young and uncertain. But standing there with hot water running over my hands and the smell of Amber's perfume drifting in from the living room, I understood something I had been avoiding. They weren't struggling, they were settled. And there is a difference between someone catching their breath and someone who has simply stopped breathing on their own. Hello, my friends, I'm Irene. This is what happened when I decided that being a good mother didn't mean disappearing into the background of my own life. Amber's comment about the car should have been easy to forget. Something small and thoughtless that most people say without meaning much by it. I tried to let it go, I really did. But it kept coming back to me at odd moments. During a ride when a passenger said thank you and meant it. During the short, quiet stretch between drop-offs when I'd park near Fraser Park and drink the last of my thermos coffee before the next ping came through. During the afternoons when I'd come home to find the living room exactly as I'd left it, except for new dishes in the sink and a fresh pile of shoes near the door. Amber had said my car smelled like a nursing home. My car, which had taken me through ice storms and summer heat, and one memorable morning when a bride needed a ride because her original driver canceled and she was going to be late to her own wedding. My car, which had logged 11,000 miles since I started driving for Uber 14 months ago, mostly because the retirement account George and I planned together, didn't account for the way medical bills accumulate in the last 2 years of a life. My car, which had paid for the Wi-Fi that Amber used to watch television until midnight. 2 weeks after the comment, the real moment arrived. Not louder, just sharper. It was a Saturday. I had finished my morning shift by 10 and stopped at a Colombian bakery I liked on the way home. The owner, a small, cheerful woman named Rosa, always set aside a guava pastry for me if she had extras. That morning she did. She slipped it into a small paper bag with a wink and said, "For the early bird." I carried it home like a small prize. When I walked through the front door, I heard voices. Colin's voice, lower and careful the way it gets when he's trying to sound mature. And another voice I didn't recognize, a man's voice. I stepped into the living room. There were 2 strangers sitting on my couch. One was a heavy-set man in a fleece vest holding a folder. The other was younger, maybe late 20s, with a tablet propped on his knee and a logo on his shirt I didn't immediately recognize. Colin stood near the bookshelf. Amber sat cross-legged in the armchair. They all looked up. "Oh," Colin said. "Hey, Mom." Good timing. The man in the fleece vest stood and extended his hand. "Mrs. Donnelly? I'm Frank Shearer. I work with a financial advisory group." He handed me a card. "Your son reached out about some estate planning options. Just an initial conversation." I looked at the card. I looked at Colin. "Estate planning," I said slowly. Amber leaned forward helpfully. "We've just been talking about, the future. Making sure things are organized." She smiled the way someone smiles when they've rehearsed the smile. Colin jumped in. "It's nothing serious, Mom. Frank just had some ideas about how to structure things. With the house and everything." "With the house." The younger man with the tablet was already pulling up something on his screen. He turned it toward me briefly. "Documents. Numbers. Something about asset transfer and probate simplification." I set my paper bag on the side table very carefully. "Colin," I said, "can I speak with you in the kitchen?" A pause. "Sure." We walked into the kitchen. I turned to face him. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "What is this?" I asked. "It's just a conversation, Mom. Frank came highly recommended. Amber's uncle used him." "Amber's uncle? He's really good. He was saying it makes sense at your age to think about at my age." Colin exhaled. "Mom, come on. I'm not trying to be morbid. I just think it's smart to be organized, in case anything happens." I looked at my son for a long moment. He was 34 years old. He had not paid a utility bill in this house. He had not bought a bag of groceries without me handing him my debit card first. He had not, in 6 months, once asked how my morning shift had gone, or whether my hands were sore, or whether I had eaten anything before driving 4 hours in the dark. But he had organized a meeting with a financial advisor about my assets. In case anything happens, I repeated. Yeah, I nodded once. Tell them thank you for coming. Colin frowned. Mom, I have some phone calls to make. I walked back into the living room, thanked Frank Shearer for his time, told him we would be in touch, and held the front door open until they left. Amber watched me with an expression she was trying very hard to keep neutral. Colin stood in the living room doorway looking frustrated. You didn't have to do that. This is my home, I said simply. Amber tucked her feet under her on the armchair. We were just trying to help. I picked up my paper bag from the side table and carried it to the back porch. The porch faced east. In the mornings, the light came in low and golden through the oak tree George planted the year we moved in. He'd said it would take 20 years to give real shade. He was right. It did. And now the branches spread wide enough that in summer, half the porch stayed cool even at noon. I sat in the old rocking chair and opened the paper bag. The guava pastry was still slightly warm, flaky, sweet, just sharp enough at the center. I took a bite and looked out at the yard. George's oak tree. George's cedar fence along the back. The raised garden beds rebuilt together in 2009, which I still planted every spring with tomatoes and basil, and one stubborn rosemary bush that had survived 11 winters. I had lived in this house for 31 years. I had raised Colin here. I had cared for George here through the last difficult months of his illness, and I had sat in this exact rocking chair the evening after his funeral and watched the sun go down and felt the particular silence of a house where someone used to be. And now my son had invited a financial planner to discuss my assets while I was out driving strangers to work. I finished the pastry. I brushed the crumbs off my hands. Then I went inside and got the small notebook from my desk drawer, the one where I kept important numbers in George's handwriting and my own. I flipped to the back pages. There was a name there. Roberta Hines, a real estate attorney I had spoken with briefly at a neighbor's dinner party 2 years ago. She had given me her card, and I had copied the number into the notebook the way you do with things you might need someday. I picked up my phone. Roberta answered on the third ring. I explained who I was and reminded her where we had met. She remembered immediately. Of course, she said warmly. The woman with the rosemary garden. I smiled. That's me. I have some questions about selling a house. Roberta didn't miss a beat. Then you've come to the right place. When are you free to talk? I looked toward the kitchen, where I could hear Colin opening and closing the refrigerator. Any time that works for you, I said. What happened over the next 10 days was quiet. That was the thing about decisions made with real intention. They don't announce themselves. They just move forward, steadily, like water finding its level. I met Roberta at her office on a Wednesday morning before my shift. Her office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, small and organized, with a view of a park where people walked dogs and ate lunches. She was in her early 60s, silver-haired, unhurried. She asked the right questions. She listened to the answers. She didn't offer opinions I hadn't asked for. At the end of the meeting, she said, "You're in a strong position, Irene. The house is in your name alone, no liens, paid off. You can list it whenever you're ready." I looked out at the park below. A man was throwing a ball for a golden retriever who kept returning it with complete and unconditional enthusiasm. How quickly can these things move? I asked. Roberta leaned back slightly. In Charlotte's market right now, a well-priced house in your neighborhood could go under contract in a week, sometimes faster. A week. I thought about that. What would you suggest, I asked, if someone wanted a clean sale? No complications, just a clear, fast transaction. She nodded slowly. Price it right from the beginning. Don't overshoot for negotiating room. Buyers in this market move fast when they see value. I drove home after that meeting with all 4 windows down because the morning was cool and smelled like October, and I hadn't felt like myself this clearly in longer than I could remember. I did not tell Colin. I did not tell Amber. I called a photographer named Joel who was recommended by Roberta and scheduled him for Thursday at 8:30 in the morning. I spent Wednesday evening cleaning the house the way you clean it when you want it to look like what it actually is, a well-loved home, cared for by someone who paid attention. I polished the kitchen windows, I dusted the bookshelves. I put fresh flowers from the Harris Teeter on the dining table, white roses, $5, the way I used to do every Sunday when George was alive. When I went to bed that night, the house smelled like clean wood and lemon, and something that felt close to dignity. The next morning, Joel arrived at exactly 8:30. He was young, quietly professional, with a camera bag that he handled with the careful attention of someone who respected his tools. He looked up at the house from the driveway and said, "Beautiful light this time of morning." I liked him immediately. Inside, Colin and Amber were not yet awake. I had not warned them about the photographer. I told myself this was because I didn't want an argument at 8:30 in the morning. The more honest truth was that I had spent years softening things, explaining things, preparing people for news they should have been able to receive as adults. I was done softening. Joel moved through the living room first, adjusting angles, stepping back, crouching low. He moved a lamp 2 inches without being asked. He said the natural light through the east-facing windows was, quote, genuinely beautiful. I had always known that about this house. We were in the kitchen when the ceiling creaked. Then footsteps. Then, the bathroom door. Amber came downstairs 12 minutes later in an oversized sweatshirt, hair loose, holding her phone. She stopped on the last stair when she saw Joel setting up near the kitchen window. "Who is that?" she asked. "Photographer," I said. Her eyes moved from Joel to me. "What for?" Joel looked up helpfully and smiled. "Listing photos." The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Amber turned and went back upstairs. I heard her voice through the ceiling, low and urgent. Colin appeared at the top of the stairs 30 seconds later. He was more awake than I had seen him in months. "Mom." His voice was careful. "What's going on?" "I'm having the house photographed." "For what?" I looked up at him. "To sell it." He came down the stairs slowly, the way you move when you're trying to give yourself time to think. He stopped at the bottom and looked at Joel, then at me. "You're selling the house?" "Yes." "When did you decide this?" "A little while ago." Joel had moved into the hallway with quiet professionalism, giving us space without leaving. Colin lowered his voice. "Mom, you can't just..." He stopped, stirred it over. "Can we talk about this? Like actually talk?" "We're talking now. I mean seriously. Without..." He gestured vaguely toward Joel. "Joel," I said, "would you mind starting in the back bedroom while we finish up in here?" "Of course," Joel said pleasantly, and disappeared down the hall. Colin looked at me. "Is this because of the advisor thing?" "Because that was just a conversation." "It's not because of the advisor thing, then why?" I thought about how to answer that. Not because I didn't have an answer. Because I had too many and I wanted to choose the right one. "Because it's my house," I said finally, "and I'm allowed to decide what to do with it." He rubbed his face. "Okay, but you live here. Where are you going to go?" "I've been looking at places." "You've been?" He blinked. "You already have somewhere." "Almost." Colin sat down slowly at the kitchen table. He looked like someone who had been running and suddenly realized the terrain had changed under him. "How long have you been planning this?" "Long enough." Amber appeared at the kitchen doorway. She had pulled her hair back and crossed her arms. "So you're kicking us out?" I looked at her. "I'm selling my house. That's the same thing." "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." From down the hall, Joel's shutter clicked steadily. The listing went live on a Friday afternoon. Roberta texted me a link. I was sitting in my car in a Walgreens parking lot between rides when it came through. I pulled up the photos on my phone and sat there for a moment looking at my own house, the way a stranger would see it for the first time. The kitchen window, the oak cabinets, the morning light across the hardwood floors, the oak tree in the backyard, wide and steady, exactly as George had promised it would be. Roberta had written, "Charming 3-bedroom home in established neighborhood." Warm natural light, mature hardwoods, beautifully maintained garden. It looked like what it was. A house that had been cared for. My phone buzzed again. First showing request already in. Then 3 minutes later, two more. I drove back through the neighborhood on my next ride and passed my own house without stopping. The maple, George's oak, was gold now, the leaves just starting to turn. It had been there for 31 years. It would be there long after any of us. When I got home that evening, Colin was at the dining table with his laptop open. He turned it to face me when I walked in. The listing. He had found it. Asking price, he said quietly. Yes. He looked at the screen again. That's. He stopped. It's fair, I said. Amber was on the couch. She had her phone in her hands, but she wasn't looking at it. You listed it with a real estate attorney, she said. Not even an agent. Roberta is very good. Amber looked at Colin. Colin looked at the screen. The room was very quiet. When are the showings? He asked. Tomorrow morning, 3 of them. Amber stood up. Tomorrow. Yes, she walked toward the stairs. This is unbelievable, she said without turning around. You didn't even ask us. I put my keys on the hook by the door. I had asked no one when I started waking up at 4:45 to drive strangers in the dark. I had asked no one when I stretched the grocery budget to cover 4 people on a retirement income. I had asked no one when I quietly stopped buying the things I liked so there would be enough of the things they expected. Good night, Amber, I said. She went upstairs without answering. Colin stayed at the table. He looked tired in the way that's different from just needing sleep. Mom, he said, I know. I don't have anywhere to go. I sat down across from him. I know. 30 days isn't a lot of time. No, I said. It isn't. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked something I hadn't expected. Did I do this? I looked at my son. Really looked. At the man he was and the boy I still recognized underneath. We both did, I said. He nodded slowly. It wasn't what he wanted to hear, but I think it was what he needed to. The showings began at 9 the next morning. 3 couples, back to back. I had made coffee and set out nothing on the counter, just clean surfaces and fresh air from 2 windows. I cracked in the kitchen to let the October coolness in. Amber was gone before 8:30. She left without saying anything, just the sound of the front door pulling shut. Colin sat on the back porch while the showings happened. He didn't hover. He didn't interfere. I'll give him that. The first couple was in their early 40s. They watched her slowly, asked good questions about the roof and the HVAC, and spent a long time standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard. The woman pointed at the raised garden beds. Are those included? She asked. The beds are, I said. The rosemary is coming with me. She smiled. Fair enough. The second couple was younger, early 30s, nervous and excited in that particular way of people buying their first house. They whispered to each other in the hallway. The man said, "Wow," quietly when he saw the master bedroom's corner windows. His wife ran her hand along the kitchen cabinets and said, "These are solid." They were. 31 years of solid. The third couple arrived with a contractor. They were methodical and practical and made notes I couldn't read. I respected that. After all 3 left, Colin came back inside. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the sink. They all seemed interested, he said. Yes. He set the glass down. Mom, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Where exactly are you moving? A small condo near Eastway. 2nd floor. It has a balcony that faces east. Colin was quiet for a moment. You already put a deposit down, didn't you? Last week. He let out a long, slow breath. You really thought this through. I really did. He turned and looked at me. I think I'd been treating this house like it was mine. I didn't answer right away. Outside, the oak tree moved in the October breeze, gold leaves lifting and settling. You were comfortable, I said. That's not the same as home. He looked at the floor. I know. That evening, Roberta called. I was on the back porch with a cup of tea when my phone lit up. The air had that clean, cold edge that October evenings carry in the Carolinas, the kind that smells like wood smoke and coming change. Irene, Roberta said. You have two offers. I set my tea down. How serious? Very. One is at asking. The other is 12,000 over. I sat with that for a moment. The second one, I said. What are their conditions? Standard inspection contingency. 30-day closing. They're pre-approved, motivated, and they love the garden. I smiled at that. George's oak tree rustled in the darkness above the porch. He would have liked knowing the garden was the detail that did it. Send me the paperwork tonight, I said. When I walked back inside, Colin was at the kitchen table with his laptop again. Amber had come home. She was in the living room, but the television was off, which meant she had been listening. Roberta called, I said. Colin looked up. There are two offers. I'm accepting the higher one. Amber came to the doorway. Already? Yes. Her voice came out thin. 30 days. Yes. Colin closed the laptop slowly. He and Amber looked at each other the way people look when something abstract has just become real. Okay, Colin said quietly. Not okay as in he was happy. Okay as in he finally understood. I picked up my tea and walked back to the bedroom. I had a 5 a.m. shift in the morning and an offer to review and a life that was, slowly and steadily, becoming mine again. The last 30 days of a house don't look like you think they will. I had expected arguments, slammed doors, long, exhausting evenings of negotiation and guilt and second-guessing. Some of that happened, but most of it didn't. What happened instead was quieter, more complicated, more real. Colin started job hunting seriously for the first time in over a year. Not the kind of job hunting that produces a polished resume and no actual applications, but the kind that fills a notebook with follow-up dates and leads to 3 interviews in 2 weeks. He got a job offer on a Wednesday, texted me from the parking lot of the office building, and when I congratulated him, he said, I should have done this a long time ago. He should have, but he hadn't needed to before. And that was both his fault and mine. Amber found a room in a shared house on the east side. 2 other women her age, a landlord she spoke to on the phone herself, without prompting. She showed me the listing the morning she signed the lease. I don't think she expected me to be glad, but I was. Not because she was leaving, because she had done it herself. My boxes accumulated slowly, 1 shelf at a time. I gave away more than I kept. The couch that had belonged to George's mother went to a young couple from my church who had just moved to the city and had nothing. The heavy oak dining table went to a family down the street who had 5 kids and needed something that could survive the chaos. I kept the rocking chair from the back porch. I kept George's watch. I kept the quilt my sister made and the photograph from our 1989 vacation to Asheville, where we had stood on a mountain overlook and George's hat had blown off his head, and we had laughed so hard we couldn't catch our breath for almost a minute. Some things you carry with you because they're yours in the way that no house or dress can contain. The final inspection happened on a Thursday. A methodical man with a flashlight walked every room. He was there for 2 hours and found nothing significant, which meant 31 years of maintenance had been worth the trouble. When he stood at the kitchen window and noted the condition of the backyard, he said, Nice oak. How old is it? 31 years, I said. He nodded. Good root system. That thing will outlast everything around it. I believed him. Colin moved out on a Saturday, 5 days before closing. 2 friends from his new job helped him load a rented pickup with boxes and the furniture I told him to take. He carried things quietly, made 2 trips without complaining, and when the truck was packed, he came back inside and stood in the hallway. Thank you, he said, for letting us stay as long as you did. You're welcome. He looked down the hall one more time. I know I made it harder than it needed to be. You did. I'm sorry about that. I looked at my son. He meant it. I could tell the difference. Go set up your apartment, I said. Then invite me for dinner sometime. He smiled. First real one in weeks. Yeah, he said. I will. Amber left 2 days before Colin did. She came to find me in the kitchen on her last morning, which surprised me. I was making oatmeal. She stood in the doorway for a moment with her overnight bag already on her shoulder. For what it's worth, she said, the house really is beautiful. I stirred the oatmeal. I know. She nodded once. I think I was rude to you. You were. She didn't flinch from that. Points for that. Okay, she said. Well, I hope your new place is good. Thank you, Amber. She left. I hope your new place is good. Thank you, Amber. She left. The front door closed behind her. The house went so quiet I could hear the October wind in the oak tree. I moved out on the last evening before closing. Just me in my car, 2 suitcases and a box on the passenger seat with the things that belonged with me wherever I went. George's watch, the Asheville photograph, my mother's Bible, a small jar of dried rosemary from the garden I had grown for 11 years. I stood on the front porch for a moment before locking the door. I looked at the yard, at the oak tree George had planted when it was barely taller than the garden fence. Now the branches were enormous, wide enough to shade the whole back half of the yard, gold in October, bare in January, green again every April without anyone asking it to be. I locked the door. I put the key in the envelope Roberta had arranged for the buyers and left it where she'd instructed. I walked to my car. I did not cry on the drive over. I had expected to, a little. But what I felt instead was something harder to name. Something like finishing. The way you feel at the end of a long book you've loved. A little hollow, a little lighter, and certain that the story was complete. The condo was on the second floor of a building near Eastway, pale brick, a row of small balconies facing east. My unit had been freshly painted in a clean off-white and smelled like new caulk and possibility. I had placed an order for a few pieces of furniture that would arrive in 3 days. For tonight, there was just my rocking chair, my suitcases, and the box. I put the rosemary jar in the kitchen windowsill. I made tea. I took the rocking chair out onto the balcony and sat down. The city spread out below me in the October dark. Lights on in apartment windows across the way. A car moving slowly down the street. Somewhere, 2 blocks over, someone was grilling something and the smoke drifted up light and sweet. My phone showed 3 texts. One from Colin, saying he'd gotten the key to his apartment and it was small but okay. One from my sister in Raleigh asking if I needed anything. One from Roberta confirming the closing was set for 9 a.m. I answered Colin first. Good. Send me photos when you're settled. I answered my sister second. Just tea and quiet, which I have. Thank you. I left Roberta's message to answer in the morning. Then I put the phone down on my knee and looked out at the dark and the lights and the smoke rising from someone's Saturday evening grill. And I sat there in my rocking chair on my own balcony and thought about George and the oak tree and 31 years, and how the thing about a home is not that you can never leave it. It's that you have to know what it was for. That house had been for raising a child, building a life, loving a husband, surviving a loss. All of that was finished. Not gone. Finished. And this small, bright balcony, this cup of tea, this particular November darkness, this was for something else. Something I hadn't started yet. I rocked the chair slowly and let the evening settle around me. No one needed anything from me tonight. No one was waiting for a grocery run. No one would comment on what I smelled like when I walked through the door. Just me and the city and all the mornings still coming. I think George would have found this funny, actually. Would have grinned and said, "Took you long enough, Irene." He would have been right. Friends, some of you will say I was too hard on my son. Maybe. Some of you will say I was too hard on my son. Maybe. Some of you will say I waited too long. Probably. But here is what I know. There is a difference between loving your family and losing yourself inside that love. I learned it later than I should have. I am learning it still. Tell me, have you ever had to make a decision that felt selfish to everyone else and felt like survival to you? Leave me a comment below. And if the story stayed with you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needed to hear it today. I've thought a lot about what actually started all of this. People want a clean answer. They want to hear that it was Amber's comment about the nursing home smell, or the financial advisor sitting on my couch, or the years of dishes in the sink. But the truth is messier than that, and I think it deserves to be told honestly. What started it was me. I had been making it easy for a long time. Every time I restocked the refrigerator without being asked, every time I paid the electric bill without mentioning it, Every time I swallowed something that stung and told myself it wasn't worth the argument, I was the one who kept the door open past the point where it should have closed. And I think that's important to say because the story isn't really about Colin being selfish or Amber being thoughtless, though both of those things were true. The story is about what happens when a person stops expecting to be treated with basic decency inside their own home. You stop noticing when it disappears. You just adjust. And then one day someone wrinkles their nose at the smell of your honest work, and something in you goes very still and very clear. That clarity, I've learned, is not anger. Anger is loud and it burns out. What I felt standing at that kitchen sink was something quieter and more durable. It was the simple recognition that I had been arranging my life around other people's comfort for so long that I had nearly forgotten I was allowed to have preferences of my own. Colin is a good person. I want to say that plainly. He is not a bad son. He is a person who was never asked to grow up inside my house, and so he didn't. That is a thing I did. I gave him comfort when I should have given him responsibility, and he accepted it the way anyone accepts something that is freely offered. I don't blame him for that entirely, but I also know that the kindest thing I ever did for him was sign those papers, because the morning he texted me from a parking lot to say he'd gotten a job offer, I heard something in those words that I hadn't heard from him in years. I heard a person who had figured out he was capable. That's what I think about now when people ask if I regret it. I regret waiting as long as I did. I regret the years I spent making myself smaller so that the people around me could stay comfortable. But I do not regret the phone call to Roberta. I do not regret the listing, the showings, the signed contract, the boxes in the hallway, any of it. I regret none of the hard parts, because the hard parts were the first honest things I had done for myself in a very long time. There's something I've come to understand about the way a life gets away from you. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in small concessions, one at a time, each one reasonable on its own. You say yes to something temporary and it becomes permanent. You stop asking for something and eventually stop believing you're allowed to want it. And then one October morning, you're sitting on a balcony you chose for yourself, drinking tea you made at your own pace, and you realize the quiet isn't loneliness. It's just yours. And it has been waiting for you this whole time. I kept the rosemary from that garden. It's on my kitchen windowsill now. Every morning, when the light comes through the east window and hits it just right, I think about George planting that oak tree in the backyard of a house we didn't know yet how much we'd love. He said it would take 20 years to give real shade. He was right. And I think that's true of most things worth having. They take longer than you planned, and they ask more than you expected. And then one day you look up and the roots are deep and the branches are wide and you understand that all that time was exactly the point.